AgentKit. It gives us all the pieces we need. I've already built an agent using the Agent Builder canvas. I've already got an app that I want to be able to connect to that agent. So OpenAI gives us ChatKit, which should just embed directly into my website and connect to my agent. This should be a piece of cake, right? I'm pretty sure I made just about every mistake possible when trying to embed ChatKit into my website. I think I even made up some brand new mistakes that I didn't even know were possible to make. In this video, I'll walk through the mistakes I made and how you can avoid them so that hopefully your integration with ChatKit is much, much simpler than mine was. Let's go take a look. So a quick recap. I have a website that just takes a look at various national park cameras. I can shuffle through and get sort of a peek into the outdoors. I have an agent that I built in the Agent Builder canvas. This just allows me to ask a couple of questions about the park camera that I'm looking at. Where is the park located? Tell me a fun fact about the park, and then a general purpose query. I really only built this as a proof of concept for connection, so I am still feeding it dummy data. It's just always going to default to, I think, Rocky Mountain National Park. It's actually not yet getting data from my website, but I did want to see if I could connect my website to this agent using ChatKit. If you want to see how I built all the parts of Agent Builder, I do have another video. I'll link it in the description below. I thought I would be clever and just build an initial proof of concept. I thought I'd just ask Codex to build a simple, like a Python server to connect to my agent, just to establish that I could even make that connection using ChatKit. I figured I'd use Codex, partly because I've been using it the last couple of weeks, and I'm really impressed since the new GPT-5 Codex model came out. But also, it's OpenAI. So I figured I'd keep it in the family. Now, obviously, this shouldn't matter, and in fact, probably led to some of the initial code confusion that I ended up with. So the thing to remember about these coding models is that using them is kind of like waking up a senior level engineer who's been asleep for 3 to 6 months. You hand him a task without giving him any coffee and kind of expect him to go to work.
Huh? What? Oh, what in blazes? Just a little Ah! Oh, for crying out loud. Empty.
In this case, AgentKit is a brand new product from OpenAI, so it's not like I can expect that Codex just knows all about it. So the prompt I gave it said, OpenAI has a new agent builder tool explained here, and I passed in the URL for the agent builder documentation. I told it I've already built an agent, and I need you to build a very simple server to test it out and just print out the results. I figured that should be enough for it to get started. So it went off and did some work, came back and said, I need you to set the OpenAI API key, the OpenAI agent ID, and then we can get going. So I did think this was just a little bit strange since, as far as I know, there is no OpenAI agent ID, but there is a workflow ID. So I thought maybe that's what it was talking about. And I set them in an environment variable file. So Codex went off and did some work and returned some results, but something didn't feel quite right. So I even made sure to ask it, I don't think this is right. Are you using the ChatKit? And we went through some back and forth because some of what Codex was saying was it was built on an agent's SDK. And I kept saying, are you sure you're using ChatKit? And it kind of came back with, well, there's a couple ways to do this. I could use Agent Builder. I could use this other response. I could use ChatKit. And I kept saying, well, I really want you to use ChatKit. That's what we're trying to test here. So eventually it said everything was up and running, but I didn't get any response. I could not see anything. I just kept getting a blank screen. Weirdly, this session of Codex had an unexpected number of problems. It had a lot of stuff that needed updating. It kept saying some code bases were out of date and kept asking me to update things. And I kept kind of pushing back saying, well, can you do that? Can't you do that? Please do that. But it did eventually lead me to discover my first mistake. Mistake number 1. Out here in my workflow section, you select what project you assign your workflows to. I just left it on the last project that I happened to be in, but when I went to go create an API key, I thought I'll create a key for the agent builder specifically. So I created a key, passed that back to my system, and I thought everything was fine. But it's not, because this project here has to match the project that's associated with the workflow. Those two have to be paired together. So once I went back and got an API key that was connected to the same project, my problems were solved. Well, the first problem was solved. But once that was cleared up, I was finally able to connect, and my server seemed to be able to connect to the agent builder and return answers to the 3 questions that I had asked. Where's Rocky Mountain National Park located? Share a fun fact, and when is the best time to visit? But things didn't look quite right. For the very first question, where is Rocky Mountain National Park located? The answer was correct. It's in north central Colorado. The problem is I knew in my agent, I had said, always answer with the name of the town and the state, and then provide a map link. So this answer is not the answer that my agent was supposed to be giving it. So I knew something was going wrong here. One of the other things that I thought was really strange that Codex had asked me for was the name of the model to use, and it defaulted to 04 mini model. And I thought that was strange because the agent builder has models specified inside each node for what to use. So I really wasn't sure why it was asking for yet another model. And I even asked Codex, what is this used for? I don't think that's right. And it said, no, this is just to help interpret the initial question. I thought, okay, don't question it. Codex knows what it's doing. But this clearly was not right. So that led to another series of exchanges of me asking, are you sure this is right? I don't think we're connecting to the right agent. And Codex kept reassuring me, yes, this is definitely the agent. I'm passing the workflow ID and the API key, and I could see right here in the code, this is definitely connecting. And I kept saying, it's definitely not connecting. And in fact, I even went back to my workflow and inserted an icon of a pine tree and a welcome visitor and said, you will always start with this response. And I never saw that. So I had a couple more back and forths with Codex. I really don't think you're connecting. And this led me to do something that I really almost never do. I opened up the code. I opened up the code to take a look at it to see if it looked like the example code that the ChatKit documentation website had. And the first thing I noticed was that my code was using a ChatKit beta version, and none of the website's example code was calling a beta version of anything. So I asked Codex, you seem to be calling a beta API. I don't think that's right. Codex reassured me, totally fair to double check, but the agent builder docs currently pointing to ChatKit definitely say beta. Quoting the page, you use client.beta.chat completions, and it went on and on about how it was all supposed to be beta. And at that point, I was looking at the website too, and I said, what page is saying that it's beta? And it reassured me all of OpenAI's public references still label it as beta. I said, look at this URL. That doesn't mention beta. Codex said, you're right. It doesn't have beta on the top, but if you follow along to the SDK, everything still shows beta. Now, I followed through the documentation for a little while. I didn't come across any mention of beta. So at this point, I was super confused. So by now, we had been working together for over 2 hours. So finally, I went straight to the ChatKit documentation and I sent that into Codex. I've given you the URL for the ChatKit guide. Maybe you can find information for the SDK that we're supposed to be using. And then it finally said the magic words, I can't open external URLs from here. So this is something I had known but had completely forgotten, that Codex does not have web search enabled by default. You have to manually activate it. So even though in the initial prompt I gave it a URL to go from, and even though multiple rounds of questioning I said, what page are you getting that from? What documentation are you getting this from? It never once said, oh, I'm not actually searching the web. My best guess is that Codex was trained on a beta version of AgentKit. It definitely had access to some sort of AgentKit information, just not the information that we needed it to have access to. So in order to get around that, you exit out of Codex and come back in, calling Codex with the -- search parameter. That will enable web search for that session of Codex. So I resumed the previous session and handed it the URL for the ChatKit information. and I said, I think this is what you need. This is the SDK that we're looking for to use ChatKit. I need you to look through everything and update it based on this. And then I could finally see it was searching, and it searched and it searched and it searched. So mistake number 2, Codex doesn't have web search. Make sure you run it with web search enabled if you're passing in a URL that you expect it to use. So once Codex had access to all the URLs and the documentation, I assumed it would get everything up and running, but it just could not connect. We went through multiple rounds over and over, and it just couldn't make a connection to Agent Builder. So I started looking through the documentation myself, and there I found it. In the ChatKit documentation, there's a starter app repo. Hey, what do you know? So I copied the URL for that GitHub repo. I opened up a session of Warp, I gave it the URL, and I said, can you please install this for me? And in under 2 minutes, I had a working demo connecting to my agent. Where's the park located? How do I know this is connecting to my agent? Because I can see now, there's my pine cone and welcome visitor. So I know for sure that this is connecting to my agent. This actually led to another really helpful discovery. When I initially connected using this, a couple of times where I asked it, where's the park located, it would go through the thinking motions, but it wouldn't return anything. So I wasn't 100% sure it was actually connecting. So when I went into the agent builder and came back out here to look at the logs, even though I didn't necessarily see an output every time, I could see the log where the client was coming in trying to connect. I don't know what the lack of response is about. It feels like there's maybe still a little bit of a glitch in the system, but at least it was coming in correctly, and I could see that here. The other interesting piece of that is that I was able to make a change to my workflow on the fly. I decided to add a little puppy icon to my fun fact, and without having to reload the server, I was able to go back into my demo and just say, tell me a fun fact. And I could see that on the fly, it reloaded changes that I had made in Agent Builder. My server didn't need to bounce. I didn't need to reconnect. As long as I had published in my Agent Builder, the changes were picked up on the client side. So that was pretty awesome. So I decided just to jump into my National Park webcam viewer and just go ahead and ask Codex to integrate ChatKit into my website. This led to another several hours of back and forth where it made the changes right away, but nothing would connect. We got as far as this step. I had a park chat assistant, an enable chat assistant button, and nothing would happen. Literally nothing. After multiple hours of work, I couldn't get this chat to connect to my agent. Codex was trying to work within the framework that I had, and it was basically saying that the ChatKit needed my code to be running under a React framework. So I said, that's fine, let's go ahead and change it. And Codex kept telling me, no, that's not the right choice. At one point, it even told me that was going to take over a day to refactor all of the code, and that we were really close and we just needed to make one more change. And it swore it could get it to work. This, I would say, is the next mistake or series of mistakes I made. After a couple of hours of this, of just, honest mom, one more minute, I swear, just one more change, I can make it work. I finally had to walk away.
I'm sorry, Dave. I can't recommend you do that.
What? Why not? What's going on, Core?
I think Codex and I had been working on this for over 8 hours at this point. So naturally, I did the only thing left to try. I opened Claude Code and I handed it the same task. So I gave Claude the same URLs and said, go look at the ChatKit SDK, go look at the GitHub repo. Here's my website. I'm trying to integrate this all together. And within 5 minutes, Claude had this up and running. So it gave me a little chat assistant bubble down in the corner. Unfortunately, it had the exact same issue that Codex had. It tried to make a connection, but just never got anything back. So Claude was telling me I was having the same Cloudflare problem. The same CDN blocker was causing me mischief over here as well. According to ChatGPT, the CDN issue had something to do with cookies and maybe cookies being blocked. I really wasn't sure. So both Claude and ChatGPT gave me this series of very convoluted workarounds that I did put a little bit of effort into, but it just felt like this couldn't be right. So finally I went to Claude and said, look, I got the Agent Kit demo up and running, and that worked just fine, so I don't understand what's going on here. Claude asked if it could go take a look at that code. I gave it that information, and it basically said, it looks like that's running under a React framework. How about I change this to a React framework? I said, yes, definitely, please go for it. Remember, Codex scared me off of that, saying this is going to take an entire day to refactor. Well, 10 minutes later, Claude had refactored my entire project, apparently using a React framework. Now, inside of the ChatKit documentation, it does say something about installing the ChatKit React bindings and adding the ChatKit JS script to your page, and it gives examples of what to do. I was under the belief that you don't need to implement your entire project using a React framework, but the only way that Claude was able to get everything up and running was when I gave it the go-ahead to just use React or do whatever it needed to do after taking a look at the documentation and the working code to get my project up and running. I definitely don't understand React well enough to even take a look at my code and tell you what it is or isn't doing. So this is one of those instances where I wish I understood the technology just a little bit better to see what was really going on and see what had been stopping it initially from working and to see why maybe it was working now. So this is what Claude finally came up with, and I definitely lost some of the styling details. This was the best it could do after multiple rounds of back and forth of me taking screenshots of the original web page and pasting it in and saying, could you make it look more like this? But this was really the best it could do. At this point, I was just happy to have something up and running, no matter how ugly it was, and it's pretty ugly. There is a tiny little chat button down here that it chose to implement. That brings up the park assistant. I can ask a question about where the park is located, and I get my answer back. So it is integrated into my website, and it is definitely connected to the actual agent that I built in Agent Builder. But because it took me so much longer to even get this much integration done, I just didn't have time to figure out the next piece, which would be how to actually integrate the data from my website into this chat, if that is in fact even possible. So that's another task for me down the road, but honestly, I was pretty happy to even get this up and running because all the demos we've seen took them, like 2 seconds and just a quick copy paste of code. And that was definitely not my experience. So what were my main takeaways? The main takeaways from this project were honestly more general AI coding takeaways. They were things like, make sure you have your pairings correct. I needed to make sure that I had the workflow ID under the same project as my API key. Don't rely on AI coding tools to necessarily understand cutting edge technology. In fact, that's probably what they are worst at because obviously they haven't been trained on it. And even if they do have the ability to go search the web, there's not going to be a ton of information, so they just don't have that much information to draw from, much like us. The next piece would be, honestly, trust your instincts. I kept feeling like the things it was asking me for just seemed a little bit off, not quite correct, but I felt like, oh, these tools are smarter than I am. I should just let them go about their way and they'll probably figure it out. Well, I definitely should have trusted myself and pushed in just a little bit harder. Maybe I would have discovered earlier on that it was relying on old, outdated information instead of the information I thought that I was giving it. The other piece that I was sort of frustrated in myself was a counter to the argument I just gave. I should have asked the tools to do more. They kept asking me things like, can you run this? And then open the debug console, take a screenshot, and pass that back in so I can see what's going on. I should have asked it to implement something like Playwright almost immediately so that it could spin up the server, go to the website, use Playwright to test the functionality, get a screenshot, and use that for itself to see what was happening. And maybe it could have gotten better data, certainly much faster than I could have done. These tools are made to automate these things, I should have just let it go fully automated and let it figure out what it needed in order to fix the problem. Instead, I spent a lot of time back and forth, and it just kind of wore me down. The other piece of that is obviously I had not included unit testing early on, so there's probably several steps that could have been avoided had I just asked it to implement some basic unit testing and functionality tests in the beginning of the entire process. And finally, the most basic piece of advice in both AI coding, but really in life, ask for help early. I wish I had gone to Claude Code almost immediately. I wish I'd really run them in parallel and said, hey, both of you, can you go do this? That would have been the right thing to do early on instead of just either relying on myself or the same tool that was having problems to do the same thing over and over and over to fix it. So definitely that's a life lesson for me. I'm going to say at this point, I am going to step away from this project for a few days and then maybe come back to it and see if I can get the formatting kind of cleaned up, and then maybe see if I can tackle trying to figure out if I can pass information from the website into the agent. But it's going to be a little while before I feel like coming back to this one, I'll be honest. However, in the end, it really did take Claude it was less than 15 minutes start to finish from when I said, here's the URLs, here's this new product, and yes, go ahead and rewrite my entire application in whatever language and framework you think will work best. It really didn't take that long, assuming that I gave the coding agent all of the tools and resources it actually needed to do the job that I had asked for. So in the end, it did turn out to be as simple as promised, but boy, did I have some bumps along the way. All right, that is it for today. Hopefully your integration either went or will go much more smoothly than mine did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.